Hello, I'm Hilary Macaskill, and this is my book, Virginia Woolf at Home. Many of you will recognise the house in the picture as of Monk's House in Sussex, where the Woolfs spent several years of their married life. But I want to talk about a house that they lived in much earlier in their time together, Hogarth House in Richmond. They lived there for 9 years, and it was, she wrote to a friend when she found it, she probably took credit for finding it because she always said she had a nose for a house. She wrote to a friend that it was the nicest house in England, and they were very happy there, but another significant thing about it is that the Hogarth Press was founded there. But I also want to tell you a little story about what happened just after I'd sent in the book. They sent in the text to my publisher, Pimpernel Press, a couple of years ago. We decided to go down to Richmond to take photographs of Hogarth House, which was a house again. After they sold it in 1926, it became an office for a solicitor, and then various officers, various organisations took it over at various times until in the early part of this century it had become a business centre. But a few years ago, planning permission was granted for it to be returned to housing. And just before we went down to Richmond, I had looked in the paper and I had seen that the houses were up for sale. Hogarth House and its twin Suffield House were now on sale for £3.75 million each. So we went down to Richmond, and at Richmond Station I went to talk to Lee Pascal in the Visit Richmond booth, a volunteer there, and he told me about an interesting conversation he'd had some while ago with the developer of the house, because she had found in the basement, tucked away at the back, what looked like a rather basic old printing press, and she'd wondered what she should do with it, whether she should just get rid of it or what. And he suggested she gave it to a museum, but my ears pricked up because nobody actually knew what had happened to the first printing press, and I just wondered if it was faintly possible that in a building that had become a mass of offices, whether it had just been ignored. It was intriguing. But back to the beginning, which is why were Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf in Richmond in the first place? And that was because they had come down there to look for a house. She had recently recovered from a catastrophic breakdown, which was brought about by the imminent publication of her first novel. And Leonard thought that what she probably needed was peace and tranquility to work, away from the thrills and spills of London, which actually she loved. You can see that from her diaries, but excited her exceedingly. And he wanted her to have the calm, and so did he, to work in. And they had done a bit of house hunting beforehand. They'd been to various areas, and actually I should say that house hunting was an interest they shared all their lives, even when they were in houses that they really loved. But they had ended up here in Richmond because they'd found Hogarth House, which they were both delighted by. But the lease wasn't available at that time, so they took lodgings on the Green in Richmond, and they wondered whether they would actually get it. But by January, a few months later, everything came right and the lease was allocated to them. And they, on her 33rd birthday, on the 25th of January that year, they went up, both of them, to Buzzard's Tea Room in Oxford Street to celebrate her birthday and to celebrate the imminent move into Hogarth House, but also to talk about their plans to buy a printing press. they'd seen one in Farringdon Road, and this was Leonard's suggestion. Apart from their combined interest in the idea, he felt that the business of typesetting, the mechanical nature of typesetting and printing, might provide good occupational therapy actually for Virginia in the intervals between her writing her novels. But the plans came to nothing just then, because before they moved into Hogarth House, before that came about, she had another breakdown and went into a nursing home, and Leonard had to move on his own. And it was several months before she returned to Hogarth House. But in due course, a couple of years after that first conversation, they went back to Farringdon Road to the Excelsior Printing Supplies Company, and they bought a tabletop press for around £19. When it was delivered, it was so heavy that Nellie Boxall, their cook, had to help them carry it into the dining room, which was the first headquarters of this nascent publishing company, though it was later moved downstairs into the kitchen basement area. And Leonard was right, actually. It did provide really absorbing work for Virginia, and he too really enjoyed the process of producing the printed word. She was very proud of her typesetting skills quite quickly, marking the time when she got her personal best with 75 minutes for one page. This printing press only took one page at a time, so it was very laborious work. But in July 1917, their first publication came out, which was 2 stories, one by Virginia and one by Leonard. And their friends lapped it up, and it was a success. And very soon afterwards, they discarded that press and bought a bigger one, which would take 8 pages at a time. So, what happened to the first press? Who knows? But could this be it? Anyway, I had to pursue it, and I tracked down the developer, Hannah Durden, who worked for Berwick Hill, and I was a little apprehensive because I assumed very likely that the press had already been discarded by them as well. But in fact, she said it was there. It was in the Kentish barn, the headquarters of the developer, and I was welcome to come and see it. And so on a snowy day, we drove through the Kent countryside and saw what might have been the press that Virginia and Leonard Woolf had produced their first work. There were 2 trays of printing of type with it, of fonts, that just reminded me of her pleasure in sorting them out and how she had difficulty sorting out the H's from the N's. It felt like a treasure hunt, and it was really quite thrilling. And we did a lot more research. We got in touch with the printing library at St Bride's Institute, because of course we had to verify that it was actually the printing press. And I got in touch as well with somebody at the V&A who was actually very as intrigued as I was about it. And then, very fortunately, before I'd got too many other people involved, the caretaker, George Drower, who'd been in charge of the business centre for several years, got in touch to say that actually he'd bought that press, that he'd done that at the behest of the previous owner, or the owner of the business centre, who'd wanted to make something of the connection with Virginia Woolf and with Hogarth Press. So that was actually really quite a relief. I was saved from making a bit of a fool of myself by writing about this, and saved a lot of time, really, as well. But there was a consolation prize, which was that Hannah asked if I would like to go down to see the house. So on a winter's day, I made my way back to Richmond and went to what was now called Leonard, and that was Suffield House, and Hogarth House was called Virginia. That was the house that Virginia and Leonard had lived in. First of all, we went into Leonard House, which was done up as a show house with chandeliers and quite big, comfortable sofas and a wonderful kitchen. But the real treat was obviously going into Hogarth House, as it was, which was empty, and it had been beautifully restored. It was a treat to see it. I couldn't see the pagoda in Kew Gardens as she had enjoyed seeing from her study, because of course there'd been so much building in the interim. But I did see, I could get a sense in the drawing room of what it was that had attracted them. It was a lovely, beautiful room, and the panelling had been painstakingly and carefully restored, with the little designs, the fleur-de-lis picked out carefully, and the beautiful staircase that Leonard had so appreciated was I could see what the attraction was. I'd just like to read you something from the book about what they felt about the house. In particular, I have to say Leonard, who was smitten by the house. He had felt from their first viewing that the panelled rooms, even when we first saw them in the dirty, dusty desolation of an empty house, had beauty, repose, peace, and yet life. Perhaps, he mused, the people who had built and lived in the house had left the aura of their lives, imposing their personality on the rooms, as though it were a work of art. More prosaically, this was a matter of bricks, mortar, wood, he said, but the way they had been used gave the house its extraordinary character of being the perfect envelope for everyday life. Leonard had the most fervent belief in the importance of houses. In his autobiography, he considered that they had the deepest and most permanent effect upon oneself and one's way of living, providing the framework of what one does, of what one can do, and of one's relations with people. In his perception, the Leonard and Virginia who lived in Hogarth House from 1915 to 1924 were not the same people who lived in 52 Tavistock Square 1924 to 1939. In each case, the most powerful moulder of them, he said, and their lives, was the house in which they lived. The interior of Hogarth House, which inspired such musings, was, Leonard felt, full of elegance, from the fine staircase to the drawing room with its tremendous solidity, and yet nothing could have been more light and graceful, more delicately and beautifully proportioned than the room itself, with its fireplace and great windows, panelling and carved woodwork. So, by the end of that year, Virginia was home again, back in Hogarth House, and she set about doing what she loved best, really, apart from the novels, apart from writing, which was to decorate and refurbish a house. She had the house carpeted in green, which was her favourite colour. She got in touch with Vanessa to talk about mixing paints, how to mix the paints, because she wanted to paint the dining room, and she asked for advice on tiles, and she talked about the curtains she'd bought, which had this lovely image. She said, "It conveys the illusion that we are grasshoppers sitting on a vine leaf," which is exactly what I wanted. But after 9 years, she began to get very restive and wanted to go back to the thrills and excitement of London. And indeed, they were both rather exasperated with the journey from London and having to leave because the last train was always in the middle of an evening meeting. And eventually she managed to persuade Leonard and went up, particularly after she'd been up to London a few times looking for particular houses and had found Tavistock Square, which he agreed with her that it was a good move. And so they left, but she missed her walks by the river. She actually, the last night before she was there, she went along the river remembering her walks, and she gave credit to Hogarth House as having after they'd spent 9 happy years in this beautiful and most lovable house. Thank you.